Hello and welcome to another video. Firstly, a quick shout out to my brother at Nexus 7 for the tracks that you can hear. I've left these details in the description below if you're interested in his music and want to hear more. I apologise for the lack of content, but due to changes in life that affects us all at the moment and due to technical issues on my internet provider's end, it has made the process tricky. 1 or 2 points have changed since recording and I've added text corrections where applicable. I will try to get vids up as often as I can and thank you for bearing with me. A quick spoiler warning in advance, this video contains footage of campaign bosses late in the game. So with that out of the way, this is a full review on one of the games I mentioned in my last video, link in the description below. I'm a big fan of isometric action role-playing games, having sunk unthinkable amounts of my life into Diablo 2, 3 and the Torchlight franchise, more notably into Diablo 3 across a couple of consoles and their respective generations and PC, but to a lesser extent with the Torchlight franchise. My initial thoughts on Wolcen were good, so did I feel the same over 100 hours in? Wolcen released on the 13th of February 2020 by Wolcen Studios, who appear to be a small team based in France. The game itself came out to middling reviews by critics and players alike, with Steam also showing middling reviews from the player base, with the main issues being bugs and connectivity problems. Have these improved since launch? We'll hopefully answer these as we dive deeper. Unlike many similar games in the genre, you actually get a character customizer in this game. Admittedly, it's not as in-depth as one that you may find in, say, an MMORPG, but the only other game of this type that I can remember having a character customizer is Torchlight 2. It adds a nice touch in this instance as you get to see your character in the many cutscenes of the game. The game itself is beautiful compared to other games of its type. The reason for this is the Cryengine 4 that they used, as Cryengine is renowned for games such as the Crysis franchise. Crysis was a high-end PC benchmarking game from release and for many years after, so your character is always beautifully rendered and the cutscenes using the game assets did blow me away a number of times. In addition, and whilst on the subject of customization, though once in-game and similarly to Diablo 3, you can customize your character's appearance with any of the armor that you've picked up along the way and use colors that you've acquired during your plays. This is unlockable account-wide, so something you found on your mage will be available on your rogue, for example. The story sees you controlling an inquisitor, tasked with protecting the world against witchcraft and demons. The opening cutscene sees you ambushed during a march to take on the Brotherhood of Dawn, which Senates has finally given you permission to engage. You and your brother and sister in arms break off from the main group and take on the attackers. While doing so, you notice that not all is as it seems, as rifts open, spewing spirits forth, who seem eager to engage you. You shortly after encounter one of your own troops acting a little strange, but is put down to shell shock. This troop is actually possessed by a demon and has you against the ropes. You miraculously transform into an angelic form that you later find out is called an Ascendant. Despite this, you still lose and get separated from your adopted family, sister-in-arms Valeria, brother-in-arms Edric, and father the Grand Inquisitor Hemlock. You then go to find answers as to what you are and to seek vengeance on the demon that sparked this all off, and you find out just how deep the corruption goes along the way, as you can't go back to your order. You have been seen transforming, and without trial branded a traitor by the chapter, and as your siblings in arms distrusting you as a potential demon.
Demon? Yes, let's hope you're wrong. Otherwise...
Talking to yourself again?
Speak of the devil. Darling, I need a moment. Talk to you later.
Whoa! Easy now! Val, snap out of it! It's me, damn it!
Horseshit!
Did you knock your head? Who do you expect me to be, exactly?
Bugs in Wolcen are frustrating, as they cause no ends of headaches. They range from glitches in the arena, in cinematics, to arenas disappearing altogether, and leaving you to fight in a small invisible rectangle, in one occasion on the Edric encounter. Unfortunately, I didn't have time to capture this particular one because with nowhere to go, I was destroyed before I had the chance to engage my recording software. In one boss fight, you're fighting ad spawns while Hemlock fights his inner demons, and in one attempt, an elite telegraphed attacks that hit me even though I was nowhere near the indicated lines, killing me in the process. When I respawned, Hemlock was on his knees at war with himself while simultaneously at my side fighting the waves I was protecting him from. The Lambak fight saw the first phase fighting Lambak with no movement animations, yet hitting me with invisible attacks, as you can see in the clip. That is not to say that endgame is without faults. Loot sometimes spills onto the floor and you're not able to pick it up until you wander off and come back to it. Loot boxes may be stuck somewhere that you can't reach, and despite the patch, this still seems to be an issue. There also seems to be some weird pathing bugs that sees your character unable to navigate a path that you're clearly meant to be able to, seeing you stopped by invisible walls that are clearly not meant to be there. Some bugs have enemies shooting at you from outside the boundaries of the accessible map. On one of these occasions, it was an elite that was needed to finish a mandate that I was working on in endgame, ruining my chances of completing the mandate. You can see areas of effects from enemies that are outside the map in some instances, further compounding that this is a fairly common bug. Some weapon combinations designed for a class simply don't work. An example of this, or maybe the example of this, is the mage and their catalyst, which can be equipped instead of a staff. The alternative to this is a melee weapon that you can use with the catalyst. When I first tried the summoner build, I had found a legendary catalyst that seemed to play well into the summoner spec. Unfortunately, all that seemed to happen on my summoner is that I continued to build rage with my basic attacks, and on a mage or a summoner, you cast spells with willpower. This builds rage that you then swing the pendulum with your stave attacks. This totally broke the mage summoner builds that I tried it on, and didn't seem to affect my rogue in a similar way. Endgame starts when the campaign credits have rolled and you are taken to the main menu notifying you that you've unlocked Champions of Stormfall. You get a brief cutscene set 6 months after the last fight, and the bureaucrats of Stormfall are bickering amongst themselves. You are now tasked with getting the city back together after its near destruction in the campaign. To do so, you choose from a list of buildings that you want developed, from irrigation to windmills, forges to additional facilities for the vendors. These help to increase the city's productivity, or providing you with power gains, reforging stats, upgrading items, and unlocking your 5th ability slot, for example. In order to complete these, you need to go off and complete mandate board missions, which are like rifts from Diablo 3. In these you either kill enemies to fill a bar and spawn a boss, or you kill specific elites to complete the mission that is set on one of 3 maps. You are given 3 lives to do this in. The other way is to complete expedition maps, which are like Diablo 3's greater rifts. To beat these, you kill enemies to fill a bar, or kill specific enemy types on one of 3 maps over 3 floors. Your lives refill after completing each level, and the item quality improves, and with each level the difficulty increases also. Very much like Diablo 3, completing these successfully unlocks the next tier of difficulty in the expedition map selection screen. This brings me neatly onto my thoughts on Wolcen. I wish I was exaggerating when I say that the endgame activities are done over 3 maps, as they take place on 3 of the 4 map terrain types. In my experience, I ended up getting the same 1 or 2 back to back. They appeared so frequently in fact that the lines blurred as to whether the layout felt identical. This wore me down particularly thin, as I shuddered at the thought of the amount of times that I would have to spend doing these. Rifts in Diablo differ in the fact that as your power increases, you can smash through a level 75 greater rift, for example, within single-digit minutes. It's also down to the fact that the level cap is 90, and my highest character is my rogue at 62, followed by my warrior at 61, and my summoner being the lowest at 57. My summoner mage was completing expedition maps 10 to 11 levels higher than her actual level, meaning that elites and bosses would have been higher still, assuming that they follow the general premise of elites. This was gaining me a level or 2 per run at best, bearing in mind that you go into endgame at around level 30 to 35ish after completing campaign. The grind is seriously dialed up here compared to the speed that you can level up in Diablo, for instance, where if you complete the game in Torment, you can reach level cap before finishing the second act, as an example. This also highlights the imbalance between builds, as my warrior was struggling in melee range with enemies of not as wide a gap between their and her level. My rogue fared somewhat better than my warrior, but in dual dagger mode struggled worse than my warrior. The resource gathering for Champions of Stormfall mission seems really grindy too. Prime example is the 5,000 resources from grinding expeditions and mandates needed to unlock your 5th ability slot. This is after spending 200,000 gold and 6,000 primordial affinity just to unlock the mission to grind for the resources. You can boost gold find, but I prioritise the skill slot, as I can imagine that you will need as many tools in your arsenal as possible to get through the harder expeditions and mandates, which I've just unlocked access to with my Summoner Mage. Along the resource management grind thought trail, removing gems, re-rolling gem sockets, gems themselves, and re-rolling stats, for instance, are not cheap, especially with higher quality gear and gems. You need gems to re-roll stats also until you unlock the crafting bench, which itself randomly re-rolls stats on items. The gem type and quality are supposed to increase the stats and directly affect the properties of the re-roll, like a red gem adding rend damage or poison gem adding poison if added to the appropriate slot. 9 times out of 10, however, this is not the case, wasting your better gems in the process. Upgrading skills via a vendor uses primordial affinity if you want to speed up the process of leveling your skill. This will set you back around 1,500 primordial affinity at around level 40 in any given skill. Respecking passives at level 60 costs around 1,600 primordial affinity. These are a run or two of picking up surplus skills in a level 60 to 63 expedition. This means that you are having to constantly review your inventory for things that you may want to keep for other characters, skills that you need to keep for materials, item modifying materials and gems, so by the end of the 3rd tier of an expedition you may have no room for essential stuff unless you're happy to keep going back and forth to the vendor on the end of each tier to sell stuff, as gold is an important commodity in Wolcen. In addition, there are too many elites that can one-shot you. There is one enemy that can pull you in close and then deliver a slam that can even one-bang my warrior with their high dodge and block chances. As they have a fair aggro range, it's even happened a few times where I've been pulled in off screen when approaching and been smashed.
Well then could we at least pull up here and get some dinner? Cause I like to be wined and dined after I've been
The developers have been updating often, as you can see in the stills, but there is so much fundamental stuff that feels broken. I appreciate that the Wolcen studio appears to be small, but surely the majority of this should have been picked up by testers in quality assurance. I hope that after a few months, things would have improved, as I am glad that I held off buying at launch. I dread to think how much worse things would have been a couple of months ago. I like how they have attempted to capture some of the best bits from Diablo and Path of Exile in the skills and passives, deepening the skills from Diablo 3 at the very least. I also think that the graphics are amazing for this style of game. Despite that, I like that they've added the passive system with the intention of depth. The majority of the passives and major perks are pretty useless. There is a clear imbalance between melee and ranged DPS archetypes in Wolcen. Endgame really needs some fleshing out. It's not an exaggeration to say that I nearly face-planted my keyboard when playing a late session as I drifted off playing the game. Not once, but twice. The campaign story isn't bad for the most part when stood next to its peers. There are enough twists to keep you hooked. The voice acting is well executed and I was invested in the characters. But the only cast that I seemed to find is Alex. I found this odd as there was a number of voices that sounded familiar, from games like Sacred 3 as an example. Unfortunately, the game also ends in a cliffhanger, insinuating that you had failed, but this is not addressed in the Champion of Stormfall, from what I have seen thus far. Champions of Stormfall is supposed to take place 6 months after the event of the campaign. Are they holding off for Wolcen 2 or a DLC? At least Diablo 3 closed the book on the chapter of its main story threads on both the base game and DLC as a point of comparison. The only immersion breaking aspects of the campaign is how everything seems straightforward until you reach certain bosses, then out of the blue and on certain builds you are smacked down. This could be a deal breaker for some alone, as it causes you to stop and rethink your build with possible stat and passive reassignments. Between levels 20 to 30, the cost of this ramps up a fair bit, as you will have invested a fair few of your points into your stats and passives, causing you to have to farm in some instances, as you will likely have pumped all of your primordial affinity into your preferred skill up. As mentioned earlier, primordial affinity is also used in respeccing your passives and for progress in Champions of Stormfall. This is especially frustrating if you suddenly need to then use a mitigating skill that you've not used previously and need to boost it from scratch. In addition, gearing up is a bit of a minefield, as you can find an item with fire damage for example, and it might have then buffs as well to material damage. As I mentioned earlier, RNG appears to be king and is present even while using specific materials that are meant to limit the randomization. I see that Wolcen Studios are putting effort into the frequency of updates, but for there to be so many immersion breaking bugs 2 months in after release, it's a little bit worrying. It is sign of the times though that you purchase a game that is half baked with the live service aspect in place to fix things post release. I would strongly suggest that you wait until the game comes right down in price, or unless the bugs are fixed with more added to endgame. Again, I apologise for the sporadic nature of content release on my channel, and I will get content out as often as I am able. This is because I'm locked in with a child with nowhere quiet to get things done in a block of flats with 12 other families in the same boat and the associated noise that comes with it. My thoughts are with you and your families in hopes that you continue to stay safe in these crazy and uncertain times, and if you enjoyed this video, please consider liking, subscribing and hitting that notification bell for future videos. It will really help this channel to grow. So in the meantime, thanks for watching.